Dvorak, award-winning national security, border security investigative reporter for TV, radio, and the print media. She is the senior foreign policy advisor for the Committee for Responsible Foreign Policy, TV correspondent, CW6 News San Diego, One American News Network, and guess what? She is streaming live at Periscope.com, Facebook, and it'll be on YouTube a little bit later on. Kimberly, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself, Chuck?
Pretty good. Sort of. You know, I was looking at some of your posts on Facebook earlier and over the weekend, and looks like you're in some cold weather and probably interferes with golf.
No, never interferes with golf. As long as it's not raining, it's okay. I'll golf in the snow, but the rain, it's just a little wet and miserable. Yes, and you're right, the weather did kind of turn. However, yesterday on Veterans Day, God was shining his light down on us. We had about 65 to 68 degrees. We were all out golfing, and I got to spend the afternoon with the veterans out at Fort Belvoir, and it was a fantastic day. So happy belated Veterans Day for all those who've served our country.
Well, hey, fantastic. And Veterans Day, and you know, and I happened to stumble upon a Marine Corps ball going on, okay, and here I am, a Navy, perfect Navy gentleman, so I didn't get that. But a lot of activity, and they were celebrating their birthday, you know, the Marine Corps
244.
Birthday. And I was actually thinking of you because you cannot bypass or pass or go by a Marine statue of some sort or decoration that you always stop at all of them. You probably go by Army, Air Force, and Navy a little bit quicker there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I try.
Yeah. You got a pretty important in-depth report here, and I can tell you that, you know, reading this source you have in Mexico, I don't know how much you can reveal on the air on it, but boy, quite interesting what this person's telling you.
Yeah, very much. I think that this is kind of collided with what happened down in Mexico a couple of weeks ago when the women and children were massacred, assassinated. We're learning that they were shot at point blank range, execution style, and we're talking about 8-month-old twins. We're talking, 6 children. We're talking 3 adult women. That the cartels, obviously had a beef with this. And, when we look at horrible acts like this, we often kind of start reflecting. Most people say that's absolutely horrible. The U.S. needs to step in. We need to figure out what's going on, which the FBI has now been asked by Mexico to come in and help with the investigation. However, people like myself and some of the other academics that I work with here in Washington, D.C., we start looking into it and we say, why? Why did this event happen? Now, there are a couple of theories going on out there. One is that there was a water dispute going on between this family who had their, a pretty significant size, property, and they were building wells for water illegally. That's one storyline. The other storyline, obviously, is mainstream media just wants to put them down because they're Mormons. But as I started looking into this and started asking questions, another possibility here is that China may have had something to do with this, because we know the cartels are willing to work with anyone. They will work with terrorists. They will work with bad guys. They don't care. They just want their money, and they don't care how they get these people across the border or what's happening with all these drugs they're moving. So the question...
Kimberly,
go ahead.
Yeah, when you bring up China, that has something to do with oil, right? Because I'm thinking people are going, wait a minute, why would they, are they worried about getting their fireworks supply cut off? I think it has to do with oil, right? It
does. And let's just like a little bit of a background here. Mexico has had a relationship with China for quite some time. They've established a presence in Mexico City for sure. Ensenada, as you will know, they have built a deep water port. So now Mexico is luring the Chinese, or the Chinese are funding the Mexico to lure them away from Long Beach, which is one of the biggest import ports in the United States on the West Coast. So what they're looking to do is get around the U.S. and not have to worry about, perfect, let's just build a port in Mexico. We won't have to worry about the Mexicans or the Americans going through our stuff anymore. So this is where I kind of started thinking about the China situation in this. Now, China obviously wants as much oil as they can get. They haven't figured it out. We're a net exporter. So other countries like Mexico are always looking to make extra money. But what's happened as of late, though, it seems that the Chinese are coming in, and because they're supplying money, they're thinking that they're really running the country, and they're allowing these state entities like Pemex to be controlled by Chinese interests. And right now, the United States, our military obviously spread very thin because we're in the Middle East, all over Africa now. And I think the Chinese are looking at our southern border, which President Trump has been, out there on this topic, and saying, look, man, we can get anything across that border. That border is so insecure, we can do whatever we want. This is where one of my sources was saying that, look, it's true. They are working hand in hand with the cartels. We're afraid that they're going to prompt the cartels to, that it'll be in their interest to move across that southern border and create some type of war. And then if if the United States is invaded by cartels, the natural reality is that we will go up down there and crush Mexico. But that's our neighbor. I don't know that we really want to go to war with our neighbor, but when you look at that scenario, and people need to ask the question, who stands to benefit if we go to war with Mexico? And this is a big if. I mean, I don't know where, they are on their plans. I'm assuming the United States doesn't want to go to war with them. But, you look at our adventurism all over the world, and, it's not out of the realm of possibility. But you have to look at who stands to gain. And, Mexico's going to be Mexico. It's been Mexico forever. So you have to look at what other countries stand to gain in that. And right now, that country is China. And they are financing, we've talked about it on the show a number of times, they're financing infrastructure projects all over the globe, namely Africa. They're branching out. They're investing in Nicaragua. And, the U.S. doesn't seem to think that this is a threat to our country, which it may not be, but it is something looking forward that we should actually absolutely consider, and a reason to bring our troops home from the Middle East and actually protect our southern border so we can stave off any kind of threat, like maybe the cartels coming into our country and trying to start a regional war themselves. If we have soldiers along that border, which we are perfectly able to under the Constitution have our army down there, then why are we not down there doing it? What is preventing us from protecting our citizens and protecting from a potential war?
I think a lot of people don't, whenever you talk about how China is expanding all over the world, a lot of people are, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. And I believe it's called the Silk Road Dominance.
Yeah.
Something to do with Silk Road.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, Silk Road, yes.
The other thing is, check it out, listener. If you don't understand, they go into these countries, say, we're going to help you develop, and they do such a good job that the countries can't really pay for what they should have paid, and so then China's going to say, well, we'll build a port here, and we'll just write off that debt, and we'll put an air base here.
Yep.
But when you talk about, an invasion from Mexico, you hear about the Mexican army, the Mexican police, but you don't really ever hear about the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force from Mexico. And I don't know how well they are when it comes to fighting a real war, missiles, rockets, stuff like that.
Yeah, well, obviously we train them, and we do know that the last group of guys from Mexico, one of the last group of guys that we trained from Mexico, all went back to Mexico and decided they were going to be terrorists. There's much more money involved in it, and of course the name is Los Zetas. We trained them, we armed them. They went back to Mexico, supposedly going to fight the Sinaloa cartel, the New Generation, the Tijuana cartel, whereas all of these people, and then they decided it was much more lucrative to take their newly gained information and training to become terrorists themselves. So when we talk about
bigger paycheck.
Yeah, bigger paycheck. And when I talk about the cartels, I think we talked about this last week and the week before. I'm going to be referring to the cartels as terrorists because they're doing things that terrorists in the Middle East are doing right now. They're actually, it seems to be more brutal. So we need to associate terrorism with the cartels for people to wake up and see what is going on south of our border and also on our streets in the U.S. when it comes to drugs pouring across our country and the gang wars that they instigate.
Now, let me ask you this. When Trump said, I'll send an army down there and we'll take care of them, and Obadar, or whatever his name is, the president, said, no, not at this time. Do you think that there might be some kind of connection with the Mexican president and the cartels?
You know, I don't think, I think that, you know, with their president now, his motto is hugs, not bullets. You know, obviously it's not really working out too well for Mexico. They're more violent than ever. He's been in office for about a year. Violence has escalated dramatically. Cartels relate that to weakness. Other kinds of, you know, transnational gangs across the globe are going to look at that as a huge weakness. And then they look at what's actually going on our southern border, and they see how open our southern border is. They see that as a weakness. So I think that that's kind of a foregone conclusion. I don't think that this guy's going to change. It's going to take something horrific. And, you know, the killing of, you know, 11, 12, 15, 30, whatever the number is this year of U.S. Subjects, not really going to be big news in Mexico. So I think, you know, this is where you see that Mexico has been ruled by the cartels for so long that most people actually turn to them when they need, you know, a doctor. They can't afford the doctor. They go to the cartel that runs the little municipality, and bam, they've got a doctor. So, you know, latest estimates that I found this year say that the cartels run approximately 80% of Mexico. So 80% of the country is run by cartels. And if that's not the definition of a cartel state and a narco state, then I don't know what is. So we're relying on the, kindness of these cartel terrorists to not infiltrate the U.S. border and not start a regional war. I don't know if they will. I certainly would disrupt some of their product, but we have an awful lot of people that last year spent $150 billion on drugs in this country. So, you know, they're going to want those cartels to keep bringing them products. So, I mean, I think this is the paradox that this country is facing right now. And with that paradox comes a lot of consequences. Namely, is we need to be protecting our borders because we just don't know what the Sinaloa cartel is going to do. We don't know what, you know, the New Generation cartel is going to do. We just don't know what they're going to do. We don't walk out there and negotiate with them. They're not a country. It's kind of like the Taliban right now. So when you see this, I mean, to the average person, if you just put it in a little nutshell like that, they go, man, bring our guys home, put them on the border. I don't want to go to war with anybody. Because so far, war for us in the last 50, 60 years, except for 9/11, has been overseas. We haven't been attacked. So, you know, we are weak on that southern border, and we do need to protect that. And we need to make sure that the cartels who basically run the country down there, that we will be willing to protect our border. By not protecting it without boots on the ground, they don't take us seriously.
You know, and we are the biggest buyers, I guess, of the candy store coming out of Mexico.
Yep, 100%.
You wonder how much and how many people of influence that are dependent on these drugs. And you know, it's sort of like, remember whenever the cocaine and the crazy, you know, with the mafia and all this other stuff, you know, and prohibition and the way that was going. Mm-hmm. I mean, you get a lot of high level officials, let's say, because surely Congress people wouldn't have anything to do with drugs, you know, or anything like that. Yeah.
No.
But you really wonder, you know, how much do they want to cut off?
Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, Trump, he's really talking about the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, I mean, we got to be their number one number one customer.
We are their number one customer, and the fact that a number of states have legalized marijuana has only made the decision by the cartels to come up with synthetic forms of drugs to get their customers a better high than what you can go down and buy at the marijuana store in San Diego, let's say. So when you look at things like this, you need to you need to look at the entire picture. I mean, we would have a whole bunch of people that are, addicted to drugs going through withdrawal symptoms if it kind of ended immediately. Do we have enough medication to get them through those withdrawals in this country? Are we storing up for that event? I mean, it's a very complex issue, but with the complexity comes the naivety that the U.S. should not be involved in what's going on in Mexico. And I think it's quite the opposite. I think, we're $22 trillion in debt. We are overstretched within our military. Our military's come out and said, we can't fight two wars at the same time. Well, what does that leave the southern border ripe for some sort of conflict? Now, maybe the world won't do it and they just think America is too big and they're not going to do it. But when you have all these other players in the field right now, you don't know. Would you trust a deal you made with the leader of the Sinaloa cartel?
Well, I'll tell you one thing I know. We're going to take a break. And then we're going to be right back with Kimberly Dvorak, Senior Foreign Policy Advisor, Committee for Responsible Foreign Policy. And you mentioned a moment ago about the FBI going in. That's news too, Steve. They may go in and help them out. Kimberly Dvorak, Senior Foreign Policy Advisor for the Committee for Responsible Foreign Policy. Well, I mentioned the FBI, and then I'm thinking about other things, because you have part of this lengthy report about El Mayo. I'm going to leave it up to you, but before that, I want to give you a heads up that ABC News did an interview with Devin Langford, okay, and that's the 13-year-old boy who walked, 14 miles in the shooting and everything, so you might want to check that out. Very interesting.
Okay.
What about this El Mayo? Huh?
Okay. Well, I'm going to tie that to a quote from a current general from the Mexican military who was talking about the violence at an event a week or so ago. He stated that, absent territory and sovereignty, we lost. The people were injured. The economy went into crisis. The country had to undertake its recovery almost from scratch. He went on to say that we're currently living in a politically polarized society, suggesting that leftist currents are not the will of the majority. The president of Mexico is leftist. The crowd that was there for this event cheered extraordinarily loudly for this. Mexico and the general here is saying we will not hesitate to go back to military rule in this country if the leftists do not get out of our ways, suggesting there could possibly be even a civil war inside that country. You're taking that into account, and then when you look at the military working with other partners, there has been Chinese military spotted in Mexico lately. And people there have said that they were tricked to believe that these people were there just touring the facilities as a part of the United Nations. Where do we go as a country? Are we to believe that we're going to sit next to a narco state country that will be run most likely El Mayo, who is Zambata? He's the financier. He's been in the drug business for 60, 70 years. He runs the finances. Nobody knows where all that money is, so he's pretty good at what he does. His son's sitting in prison in Chicago, expect to get out in the next year or two, to which he'll go back and probably run the Sinaloa cartel. These are warning signs. When we see these things and you put them together, these are warning signs. So it's up to us as journalists to kind of point out that we're seeing some of this stuff, and it's up to the American public and lawmakers and law enforcement to make sure they are on top of this and that we have a plan in case the worst thing happens. And that would be an invasion along that southern border. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just stating that the possibility exists for something like that to happen. And if we don't wake up, the possibility grows.
Yeah. Defense is the best offense, as they say.
Yep.
Boy, There's so much going on. I don't think the average American realizes, they hear bits and pieces about south of the border, but, and then they get very political. And I don't want to hear it because, Trump wants to be able to ball.
Yeah.
Yes. So that cuts it off right there,
Exactly. So it's just we need to talk about it. That's all. American journalists need to be talking about this a lot more, in my humble opinion. But we need to be prepared, and that's I think what the crux of this report for me is. We need to be prepared for what may or may not happen down there.
And of course, DACA, big story, Supreme Court, and all that going on.
Yeah.
So, boy, I'm telling you, lots and lots. Hey, remember the last name? It's Dvorak, listener, Dvorak, Kimberly Dvorak. You'll find her on